Welcome, everyone, to Big Think Live. I'm Latif Nasser, a producer for the New York Public Radio show Radiolab and the host of the Netflix show Connected. Today's topic is how to re-examine everything you know, and we are happy to welcome back Malcolm Gladwell.
Thank you.
For the 5 people on planet Earth who do not know Malcolm Gladwell, he is primarily known as the author of 6 blockbuster books, the titles of which you can combine into the following phrase: What the Dog Saw Between Blinks, about how Outliers, David and Goliath reached a tipping point in talking to strangers. He is not only a renowned author, he has also produced over 50 episodes of his acclaimed podcast, Revisionist History, and written dozens of long-form articles for the New Yorker magazine, all of which embody his signature brand of being a polite but playful contrarian. Whether you agree or disagree with his typically counterintuitive arguments, you cannot but be impressed by the perverse and often baffling range of topics he chooses. In this latest season of Revisionist History alone, for example, he covers a con man trying to dupe the world about billionaire playboy Howard Hughes, the Ivy League origins of napalm, and a minor Van Gogh painting that doesn't look like a Van Gogh painting. As a fellow scrawny Canadian with curly hair, I am so pleased to be able to talk to Malcolm Gladwell. Welcome, Malcolm.
Thank you. Delighted to be on the show.
I have a bushel full of questions for you about the world that is on literal and figurative fire around us. But first, I wanted to start by talking about the thing that you're actually here to talk about and is well worth talking about, which is the latest season 5 of Revisionist History. At the start of the final episode, you give kind of a sweeping thematic summary of the season. Mm-hmm. You say it's a season about attachments. Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah, it always emerges in revisionist history seasons that there's an underlying idea that seems to connect at least some of the shows, and that's just how my mind works. That I tend to worry an idea to death, and this season, I just felt that what linked a lot of the shows was this idea of how we get attached to ideas, and it wasn't so much people, but it was attached to ways of doing things that aren't necessarily rational. And it was that I was sort of probing the appropriateness of those continuing attachments. I realize when I put it that way, it sounds really boring. But in fact, I think the answer is it wasn't boring. But by its very nature, when you're trying to find a common theme in 10 very different shows, the theme's going to be pretty bland.
Well, or maybe loose is a nice, more charitable way of saying it. But I do think, at this very moment, in this, and I don't know sort of when exactly you sort of finished and reported all of these episodes, how it fit into the sort of COVID world, but it does feel like it's a moment when we're all kind of all the attachments we took for granted, all the routines, all the ways of doing things are upended. I don't know if how did COVID sort of figure, if at all, into this season?
Well, quite a lot, because I do the season. I start reporting and conceiving of it in January, and finish in June, early July. So, I had probably thought of, I'd reported maybe 2 episodes by the time COVID started ramping up, or 3 episodes. So, it was very much in the back of my head. What I didn't want to do was to explicitly talk about it, because I felt like there was enough media on COVID. The world didn't need Malcolm Gladwell to weigh in on it, but I did think that they were, the mood of the season was very much influenced, I think, by that.
Yeah. Are there any specific, out of just fishing here, but are there any specific ways that you felt like, I made this choice differently, or I would have done this story and not that story?
Sure. The last episode of the season, which I think is the best, it's called A Memorial for the Living. that is really about COVID. But it doesn't ever mention it. It was just something when you're in the middle of a pandemic that's claiming hundreds of thousands of lives, this episode asked the question of how do you remember those who have been affected by some kind of tragedy. And I used the example of the 9/11 memorial, and I also used the example of the work of a homeless advocacy group in Jacksonville, which, again, seems like an odd pairing, but the point of the episode is to convince you that it's not an odd pairing. But the larger point is, as a society, we spend a lot of time and attention remembering things, and some things we remember a good deal better than others. And are those ways of remembering, do they make sense? Are they morally justifiable? And I think that in our case, they're not morally justifiable. But that I would never have come to that episode had it not been for the kind of shadow of COVID. So it does show up explicitly in the end. In that final episode.
And it was such a beautiful episode because it was not. It was. I mean, you said remembering things, but it wasn't just remembering things. It was remembering people and remembering dead people. And what do we, in a way, what's in the spirit of Memorial for Dead People? What do we do for living people?
Yeah. What do we learn? Because the kind of, I'm not giving it away here, but the kind of point where I land on in the end is that memorials for the dead are supposed to be rehearsals for the way we treat the living. That's the point, right? The reason you remember the fallen soldier is that it reminds you to keep an eye out and keep watch over the current soldier. And, and I think in that kind of implicit pact that we made years ago about memorials has been forgotten. And now we just remember the dead and then seem like we go on with our lives, which I find distressing.
Let's dive into a different episode, which is the episode I'm actually most excited to talk to you about, which is episode 3, Powerball Revolution.
Oh yeah.
In a way, it's a classic Gladwell kind of question, which is, how do we choose the right person for the job? You have looked at that question as it applies to hiring assistants, to selecting law school students, to recruiting quarterbacks. But in this case, it's a very 2020 appropriate topic. It's how do we pick the right person to lead our government? In this case, a high school student council president
in Bolivia,
in Bolivia, no less. Right. So tell me about this sort of crazy idea that's the kind of central nugget of this episode.
Well, I've always been interested in lotteries. I think lotteries are massively underutilized. And I just love the idea that when you choose something by chance, then you completely change the psychological and also the kind of ethical framework of the selection. That if I chose the students of Harvard University by lottery, then you would feel very differently about having gone to Harvard, right? You would say, oh, this is a privilege to go to the greatest school in the world, not a prize that I won, that I deserve to win.
It's an arbitrary privilege in a way.
An arbitrary privilege, not something that came to me because I'm a great person. And so I've always been intrigued by them. And I was rooting around online. I ran across this guy named Adam Cronkite, who decided to take this idea very seriously, and who went to, for long, complicated reasons, went to Bolivia and started trying to convince schools, public schools, to choose their student governments by lottery. And then he tracks what happens. And what he finds happens is something completely unexpected, which is, first of all, that when you go to a lottery system, the number of people who run for higher office in a school grows dramatically. In other words, democratic elections, which we think are ways of throwing the field as far wide open as possible, don't do that. They scare people off. Lotteries throw the field wide open. Secondly, he found that when you choose a student council president by lottery, they're much more serious and much more they have a much wider array of things they're interested in doing. And that's because you're choosing a much more diverse, by definition, a much more diverse, you're not no longer the clique of the popular kids, it's everyone. So they're going to be interested in everything now. But most importantly, he found that you could not predict who was going to be a really good student leader. And all your expectations were upended. So they would choose these slates of government by lottery, and they would say to each other, oh, that's a really shy kid who's not a very good student. He's going to be terrible. Oh, my God. And then that kid would turn to be the best. Or there'd be a really charismatic, handsome, driven kid, and they would think, oh, my goodness, what a leader. And that kid would be a disaster. And they realized that the whole premise of elections, which is that we can't effectively predict who's going to be a good leader, is nonsense. And those three insights, to my mind, are so fantastic and so relevant to what we're in right now. And I also, as often is the case in these things, completely fell for Adam Concrete. I love this guy. I just think he's fantastic. Everyone should spend time with him and learn from him. I just think it might be it's one of my favorite episodes from this season.
But part of the fun is you don't just kind of listen to Cronkite sort of talk about the tales of what happened in Bolivia. You also bring this to a school in New Jersey.
Oh yeah.
What happened there? And I wanted to keep hearing what happened even after the episode.
Yeah. Well, so I took the idea to this fancy private school in New Jersey and basically pitched them. I got a group of 20 students who represented all the student government of the school and a bunch of other people and people who were thinking of running. And I told them what Adam Cronkite was doing. And I was like, would you do this at your school? And then I said to them, let's make a pact. I'm going to poll you. I'm going to have you all vote and tell me, not vote. I'm going to secretly poll you about how satisfied you are with your current method of student government. And if the satisfaction level is below a certain point, I want you to pledge to change your system to something more Adam Cronkite-y. And they have a very elaborate system for electing student government, speeches and rounds, all nominations. I mean, a kind of prototypical democratic system that has been in place for many years at that school. When I polled them about their happiness with the system, I found that I asked them to rate a scale of 1 to 10. I think the average score was like 5.8. That's a really low score for happiness with a democratic system. And I walked them through what Adam was doing, and then we had a discussion. And I found them surprisingly open to the idea of incorporating at least some elements of a lottery into their student government. Now, then COVID hit, and they all scattered in a million ways. So we don't have a definitive answer. But we heard from the incoming student council president, and she says she's going to try and push through some changes for next year. So.
Got it. I was wondering why you didn't sort of take it all the way, but it sounds like it's because COVID sort of disrupted.
COVID, yeah, they're all in and also it's always a good question when you're telling a story like that. Do you want to take it all the way, or do you want to leave it open ended? Because
it's an experiment. You want to hear the answer. You want to hear what happened. Not that that's definitive, but I mean, in a way, I guess the way you present it becomes definitive. But it's just fun. Like you want to hear you set up the little Rube Goldberg machine and you want to see if it works.
Well, here's the thing though. What I would say, there's two ways of responding to this. One is to respond as you are, which is a kind of the intelligent, rational person's response. Which is, let's see the experiment through. But then there's also the storyteller's response. Now, you are also a storyteller. So
true, fair.
There are two sides of your personality, which are you're letting your rational, intelligent self rule here. Let me just pose the storytelling side too.
Okay, go for it.
Which is, we already have the experiment. Adam's done it in Bolivia.
Yeah.
He's conducted it. He has results. He's observed for years what happens. So we have our little case study and it's complete. So is the story better if I tell another complete case study, or is the story better if I add to that a partial update in which I leave open the question And the real uncertainty, because what interests me as much as anything is I'm almost more interested in the idea that a bunch of privileged kids in New Jersey would reject this idea as I am in that they would accept it.
Yeah.
I'm as interested, in other words, in the idea that we would struggle with lotteries as I am in the fact that we would embrace them. And so by leaving it open-ended, I kind of leave the question hanging of why is this so hard for us? Right? Maybe this is hard. Why is it hard? Think about why it's hard. Whereas if I tied it all in a knot, you could kind of push the story aside and go on to the next thing. You leave it open.
It's fair. It's funny you bring up sort of the storyteller sense, because I actually, back in 2016, I stumbled on a story. It was in a story about city councils in Utrecht. Mm-hmm. Where they did this similar thing, and they call it, the phrase for it, I don't know if you ran across this, aleatoric democracy. Mm-hmm. And I pitched it to my editorial team at Radiolab, and they, unlike the New Jersey school, they were like, "No way, not a story here. This seems ridiculous and ludicrous." And
oh, really? Also, Utrecht. I love how you have to, it almost seems as exotic as Bolivia.
It does. But to me, the fun of this, and perhaps it's because it was open-ended, is it just makes you just go off into this alternate universe where this is our standard of government, this is our form of government, or after last week, our form of picking Supreme Court justices. Just indulge me. Take me to this fantasy world where this is how our government works. What would it look like? How would it be different from this current universe we live in right now?
Well, you probably want a two-stage system. You probably want to assemble a group of people who meet some set of requirements, put them in a big pool, and then choose your winner by lottery. So that's why in the middle of that episode, I talk about NIH grants, scientific grants, and how they're awarded, and how when the NIH looked at the grants it gives out for research, they discovered there wasn't a good correlation between their scores they gave a grant application, in other words, how successful they thought a grant application should be, and how successful it actually was. That there was in other words, their predictions about which ideas would be the most worthy of funding were wrong. And so what they proposed was, maybe what we do is we do the first cut. We get rid of the obviously incompetent stuff, the stuff where the people clearly don't know what they're talking about. And then we create a pool of any idea that seems pretty good. And then we choose from that pool, we just pick winners at random. Because in other words, what they discovered was they're just not good at the last mile, at sorting, at picking out the best ideas from a pool of pretty good ideas. And I like that idea. I think in general, college admissions should be just assemble a large pool of pretty good students and pick the winners by lottery. I think job applications, I think you just assemble a pool of pretty good and pick the winner by lottery. And I think that's the way to do it in government. That, it's really hard to believe. Like when I look at the Democratic candidates for president this year, I could make a case for any of them. Mm-hmm. And it's not clear to me at all that we picked the best one.
Well, but here's the difference, though, I would argue, between NIH scientific studies that you can kind of really clearly discern what the merit is, and some will be duds and some will sort of flourish. And the difference between that world and the world of politics, which is to say, I think that it's almost like a full half of the job of elections is not just picking the best person, it's buy-in. It's like there's a kind of a legitimacy of the process. Even if we're making the wrong decisions, we all bought in. They're all of our decisions. We own it together.
Yeah. But this is great. No, great point. You're totally right.
Yeah.
The question is, can you get buy-in? So I've forgotten how many Democratic candidates for, was it?
Right.
20?
There was a full stage of them. Yeah, sure.
So let's say that the point of the primary process was to cut that number in half.
Mm-hmm.
Leave us with 10. So we're going to get rid of the half who are not very popular, clearly unacceptable, crazy, whatever. And we're going to stick, and then we're going to take that second 10 and we're going to pick a name out of a hat. Does that give us enough buy-in? I would argue it does, or at least it would over time as we got used to it. And particularly now, because the kids at the school in New Jersey raised this point as well. And my answer to them, we cut this out, I think, of the final version. My answer to them was, well, why do you think the system as it stands has a lot of buy-in? Every single president of the United States since its inception, with two exceptions, have been tall, middle-aged white guys.
Yeah.
Right? Why do we have buy-in to a system that just elects the same person over and over and over and over again and systematically excludes not just every woman and not just every person of color, but every short person?
Yeah.
I mean, it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
It's the craziest system in the world. So, like, if you can get buy-in in a system that exclusively chooses its leaders from the same narrow band of highly privileged white people, why can't you get buy-in from a system that says, in the name of opening it up, I'm going to use a lottery for the most acceptable, for the last 10?
But then why not? I would argue then the opposite side. So then if it's about fully reflecting this crazy tapestry that we live in, why sort it at all? Why have a cutoff? Like if this country is like, let's just open it up. It's a free for all. It's literally a lottery. It's like jury duty. Anybody could be president.
Yeah, but then, okay. So, you know, I cannot tell you how much my heart wants to agree with you. But, so I am right there with you, except I do think there's enough lunatics. I mean, if Alex Jones, or I don't know, like I do think it's fine. I have very little confidence that we can, in any circumstance, reliably distinguish between the pretty good and the very good. I do have confidence that we can reliably distinguish between the grossly incompetent and the merely mediocre.
I don't know. I feel like current events might argue against you there.
But don't you think if I'm selling this to the general public, I'm going to have an easier time if I say you get the first cut to get rid of the notifications.
Right. I mean, I think. Yeah, but like jury duty exists, right? Like we get that. We get what that means, where it's like, okay, we're going to pick you randomly for this very important, very, in some cases, life and death stakes job, where you have to be an expert and you have to be a decider.
But then the lawyers sift, right? They get rid of the ones that don't think are appropriate. So there's also a sifting process going on there. They just do it after the fact, not before the fact.
Fair. Yeah, but to me, what if you did open it up? Like, I think then I'm just trying to imagine the hypothetical scenario where this is. Like, I think what would happen then is that you might have it's like shorter terms and less executive power in a way. Like that power, you would want to take it away from somebody who could do any crazy random thing, and you would give it more to a deliberative body made of a lot of people who may themselves have been chosen this way, but at least there's a lot of them. You could sort of iron out the kinks. Yeah.
So, and here's this idea about if there was theoretically less buy-in, is that there's a system. Here's a case where maybe the slightly less buy-in is better. In other words, it gives us a certain detachment about our leader and a certain sort of objectivity about, well, they are a person who are dealing with a set of very, very difficult circumstances. We chose them from a pool of people who we all thought were pretty good, but we're not like, it's impossible for the leader to say, I was sent by God to be your messianic leader with this vision handed down to me from the heavens, right? You can't say that if you were chosen randomly,
unless you say that God chose the fava bean to put you right there.
Right. So to your point, what having a lottery system for choosing the president would do would be to kind of lower the temperature of, and it would make Congress, it certainly would beef up separation of powers. It would make all the checks and balances, I think, perk up, because you would have to be on your toes, right? You've got somebody now who, maybe is coming from left field. So I think maybe impeachment would be much more of a commonplace in that situation. So I don't mind someone. I didn't realize you were Canadian, by the way.
Oh yeah.
From where?
I'm from Mississauga.
Oh really?
Yeah. We are fellow kids of immigrants who emigrated to the U.S. to make their living telling long-form, surprising stories about science. Not to mention, we have a weirdly similar body shape and hair type.
I know. I was going to say, it's astonishing from Mississauga even. So the Canadian system where, if the leader is problematic, you just get rid of them, right? Like I sort of like that idea. I think.
Yeah.
I don't know why Americans are so wedded to the notion that when you elect someone, they absolutely have to finish their term. Why?
But there's something about. I mean, I agree. But there is something about, and I think this gets to your point of like why. If I'm checking off a person's name, it's like I have a direct connection to that person. That person, in a way, is like in my fantasy beholden to me, or something. In a way, there's a personal connection there that feels much more real than it actually is. It seems like there's something there that personal connection would be lost. Why?
Well, devil's advocate.
Yeah.
Most of the authority figures in our life whom we respect and obey and do all kinds of things are not people we choose, right? Mm-hmm. You don't choose your parents. You don't choose the judge who hands down a sentence in a court. You don't choose the police officer who stops you. You don't choose the general who commands you in wartime. I could go on. In fact, and probably 50% of the elected leaders who you are subjected to, you didn't choose. So,
but that's the central marrow of a democracy. It's like I choose the sure, I don't choose all these underlings, but the honcho that they all report to, their boss's boss. No. That's the guy.
In a democracy, you choose the system. In Canada, you never choose.
Fair, true.
Ever,
true.
Right?
That's true.
So democracy.
You just choose your person, who then chooses that person.
Yeah. So you're committing. I think democracy is a commitment to a system that you think fairly represents the population's interests. And I'm just proposing an alternate and I believe more fair system. I don't think, now that you're now you're convincing me that this whole buy-in thing is nonsense. No, it's about a system. I think this system is so transparently better.
Yeah. I mean, it's you don't have super PACs or butterfly ballots or voter suppression, or there's like a giant laundry list of problems we could sidestep.
Let me give you a little side story about this, and I've said this before, and so the person I'm talking about is if she becomes aware that I said this again, she'll be fine with it. I randomly met the former Secretary of the Air Force before the current one was a woman named Heather Wilson, who I met she gave a presentation at something I was at. And I don't know anything about Heather Wilson, except what I learned in this presentation. And I looked her up and read about her. And she's had this, she was a brilliant student, Rhodes Scholar, university president, Secretary of the Air Force, Congresswoman. She is thoughtful, incredibly articulate, has a wonderful manner about her, respectful. I mean, I looked at her and I said, if this woman ran for president of the United States, 75% of Americans would vote for her, right? Now, will Heather Wilson ever run for the president of the United States? No, she never will, because she doesn't want to put up with all the crap. But I suspect that there are a lot of Heather Wilsons out there who, if there was some easier entry point, would throw their hat in the ring. A lot of really good people would come out of the woodwork. And that's, to me, if we could just go to Heather Wilson and say, can we put you up for the lottery?
Yeah.
She would say, yeah, I'll do that. But I'm not going to spend 10 years of my life raising money and, having every aspect of my life scrutinized by, blah, 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 blah.
Right.
And that was that's Adam's core insight was when you had elections, 3 kids ran for student council president. When you had lotteries, in some case, the entire school was running. That's just so beautiful.
That's buy-in. That's a different kind of buy-in. That's a different level of buy-in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's systemic. So my point is, if we saw the Heather Wilsons of the world suddenly saying, I'm interested in holding office, but not running for office. If we understood that distinction and how much better it is to select people on the basis of their desire to hold office, not run for it, then I think we'd have buy-in.
I actually want to keep talking to you about this, even though I sort of had allotted time to talk about different episodes. But so we'll move on begrudgingly to another. Speaking of Air Force, is a good transition. You devote 4 episodes of this series of this season to the story of Curtis LeMay. Now, I'm a fairly historically minded, well-read person. The only 2 things I really had heard of Curtis LeMay before I heard this series that you made. One was his nickname, Bombs Away LeMay.
Yeah.
And also a corollary to that is the idea that he was the inspiration for the sort of trigger-happy general in Dr. Strangelove. And the second thing was a thing you sort of honestly own, like right at the top of the series, which is that this man probably killed more people. He's probably in the top 10 of sort of civilian deaths on his hands. And I got to admit, like when I was like, we're doing a revisionist history of this guy. Like, tell me the genesis of that impulse. I know obviously you're a military history nut who has done a bunch of stories about bombing before. What made you want to kind of grab onto this guy?
I always forget why at the beginning. I wanted to do one show on him because I wanted to do a show about bombing. And then I thought, well, maybe I'll do it on the firebombing of Tokyo. And then I was in Tokyo in December. And I went to this little museum in Tokyo that's a museum dedicated to the memorializing the victims of the Tokyo bombing of March 10th, 1945. And so I said, oh, okay, this is really interesting and moving. I'll do an episode on it. And then the episode just kept on growing. And in fact, those 4 episodes are now the basis for a much longer audiobook that I'm doing, which expands the story exponentially. And so it's not really about LeMay anymore. It's about something much broader. I just finished actually that audiobook. So the whole thing has just been, every time I poke my finger in this subject, it gets bigger. So in the beginning, it was just super modest. And then I just discovered all this incredible tape at the Air Force Academy. And it just kept growing and growing and growing and growing. And the more I looked into it, the more just riveted I was by the complexity of the kind of moral choices made by these people in the Second World War.
It is indeed an amazing bounty of tape that you and your team found. The one thing that I think like people probably may not realize is that night, the firebombing of Tokyo, that was the one. I don't know how long exactly the firebombing took place, but that was one of the deadliest nights in human history, if not the deadliest night in human history.
Might be the deadliest night in human history.
Yeah, that's astonishing. But to me, like the move, it's an interesting and bold move to say, I want to, in a way, like you start with a sort of a childhood anecdote of this man to say, I want to sort of humanize and complexify the portrait of this man who was responsible for the deadliest night in human history. What like that's an intense move.
Yeah, what I've discovered, and I wonder if you feel. I suspect you feel the same.
Yep.
But there's something about the storytelling, the kind of context of storytelling, audio storytelling, that where your audience is far more forgiving. They're willing to. I don't want to use the word indulge because I don't think that's the right word, but they're willing to accept the story on your terms in a way they wouldn't if it was. To me, print is really rigorous. Print, you analyze it like a lawyer, and when you see something that you think is wrong, it calls out for. It's what Twitter's all about. Twitter behaves like Twitter behaves because Twitter is a print medium. It's the not print, but I mean, you know what I mean. Like, sure. It's words. It's printed. It's printed words. But the minute it's somebody's voice telling you a story, your attitude is, okay, tell me the story.
Right.
I'll go with that. I'll see where it goes. I mean, I don't know. There's something I didn't realize this before I got into doing podcasts. Just how beautifully accepting the medium is of people who want to take chances. Mm-hmm. And a lot of revisionist history is about, it just is exploiting that freedom. It's like, if we want to engage in what may be go down some ludicrous alleyway, it's fine. It's a ludicrous alleyway. They can be really interesting, right?
Yeah.
In the case of Curtis LeMay, it's like, well, why not take him seriously as a person before we analyze, and as a way of understanding why he did what he did?
I've certainly found that in my own experience. Especially, I find audio is so good for maybe not necessarily comparing it to print, but comparing it to documentary film or something like that. Like I might not, if you saw the guy from Strangelove with the cigar and like. You wouldn't give that guy necessarily a chance to be a deep moral, have a deep moral view of the universe, or vice versa. If I'm sure there are certain segments of the population that would see, somebody else with, I don't know. You judge people by their appearances, and in a way, with audio, all of a sudden that person is in your ears. They're literally talking to you from inside your own skull, and you give them a chance in a way, or you give them a hearing, literally.
And you're also, again, this applies more to you than me. You're not telling the story in a vacuum. They know you. They've heard your voice before. They've heard you tell stories before. They trust you. You've built up trust with your listener, and that allows you to do all kinds of. I won't say which, but we've been toying for the longest time, Revisionist History, of doing a little Radiolab spoof based on
please do it.
Based on one of your episodes that we greatly disagree with. But I can't bring myself to do it because I have such affection for Radiolab that how do I do a spoof of something that I have enormous affection for?
Wait, can I guess what episode it is? Is it BitFlip?
Not telling.
Not telling. Okay. Oh, I hope it's one of mine. I would love for it to be one of mine. Okay, I had way more questions about this and other episodes, but I'm going to jump to the sort of big questions I had at the end that I really want to ask you. And in a way, because I see us personally as sort of similar and the things we do is sort of similar, although you are on a different stratosphere than I am. I do have...
I'm 20 years older than you probably. Totally not fair to say I'm on a different spectrum. I am when you're as old as I am, I expect to be where I am.
That's fair. But what I want to do is sort of ask you a lot of questions that are actually sort of deep questions I have about myself and what I do. And maybe hopefully you have some clarity on. So one thing that you are, I think, supreme at, and something that Radiolab, where I work, we similarly sort of have a fetish for, is the element of surprise. You are a master of surprise. You have, and I feel like it's you and Freakonomics and Radiolab. There's a kind of a cluster of forces in this in the world of journalism that is kind of conditioned audiences to like love and crave and even sometimes expect surprise from their nonfiction in a way. And I did an interview a while back with a scientist at MIT who studied how fake news spreads on social media. And basically his answer was that it's not bots, it's not this, it's not that, it's us. Like, we share fake news on social media because it's better at delivering that sort of frisson of surprise. And for me, I feel like, oh God, like, have we been this kind of handmaiden for fake news? Have we sort of conditioned audiences? Have we unwittingly paved the way for this kind of fake news explosion?
I would quarrel with the notion that fake news is, to my mind, fake news does not have a kind of a profile that's any different from real news. I mean, when I say a profile, it's other than the fact it's not true. So, for example, up through the 1960s in the United States, many Americans in the South thought that Black people were genetically inferior to white people. That's fake news, right? That's not a surprising fact to someone in Alabama, a white person in Alabama in 1955. In fact, it's the opposite. It's a reassuring fact that confirms a lot of their deeply held prejudices. The surprise to them would be, actually, there's no difference. All this is just sort of science that has been twisted and turned, and that would be shocking, right? So I don't know, like, I feel like in both real news and in fake news, there's an equal number of things that are either seem true because they confirm our biases, are deeply comforting and satisfying, or are shocking because they challenge us. It's not; those things are not. They're not tied to the fakeness or the realness. They're just the forms in which information takes in a free exchange. Does that make sense?
Yeah, kind of. But so this MIT scientist I talked to, Sinan Aral is his name, and his thing is that it's like fake news is designed to hit that surprise button, even if it is reaffirming your beliefs. It's that initial hit of surprise. It's sort of designed, it's tweaked to be the like even more Malcolm Gladwell-y a story than one you could ever find in the real world, or I could ever find in the real world.
Yeah, maybe. Although, I mean, I don't know. I'm struggling to see, like, here's a surprising COVID thing that has come up in the last couple of weeks. Is all this emphasis on surfaces is probably nonsense. Mm-hmm. It's really about ventilation. Mm-hmm. Right? That will come as a surprise. I'm still going to stores where they make you clean your hand, wash your hands.
Correct.
And they're like taking Lysol and
right, drenching everything.
They would be stunned to learn that was just all not happening, right? So I just, in this case, the fake news is the thing that's saying it's everywhere. It's like there's a million ways for you to die. There's actually not a million ways to die. There's a couple of pretty clear pathways, and that's a surprising fact at the moment. So I don't know. I'm not convinced by this.
All right. I probably should. Well, I have more questions of my own, but let's see if we have some audience questions here. We have a lot of them. Okay. This is a good quickie from Luke Sims. What book do you think every student should read?
Oh, wow. Well, I mean, I'm going to be boring and say the Bible. Yeah, I mean, I would say that's boring.
No, I mean, you can give me one sentence of explainer why.
Well, I don't think you can understand. I mean, so much of particularly Western literature, modes of argument, ways of thinking, ethical concepts, all come out of the Bible. I mean, it was the foundational document of the last 2,000 years in the in the West. It's like, it's, like, I cannot tell you how many times, even if I am religious, even if I were not religious, how many times things I learned by reading the Bible help me understand, make sense of, particularly ethical problems. I mean, I think one of the things we underestimate is, we all grasp the notion that you need education and training and thoughtfulness to solve logical problems or scientific problems, or, to program your computer, and then we overlook the fact that you also need training to solve ethical problems. Ethical problems are not intuitively, all of us aren't born with the world equipped with the ability to see what is the right moral choice in any situation. You need training in that as well, and I think we've neglected that training. Yeah. And we have a lot of our kind of the crazy ethical stuff that goes on now is just because nobody knows what they're talking about when it comes to ethics.
Yeah.
And, I think if you read the Bible, you at least have you're exposed to the foundational document. I mean, it all basically our contemporary notions of ethics come out of that tradition. So learn the tradition, for goodness sake. I mean.
Yeah. And so are you, and not to target it, but are you talking Old Testament, New Testament? Are you thinking that there is
both?
Sorry? Both.
I mean, the full-on
whole package.
Both are interesting and important in different ways, of course. But
sure,
I mean, while you're at it, I mean, you can stop if you like at the end of the old. But why not just keep going? I mean, it doesn't get less interesting. I mean,
right. Yes, right. Okay, let me find another question here for you. Okay, here's a question. Hi, Malcolm. I don't know if you can answer this to however length you desire. Hi, Malcolm. It has been almost 12 years since Outliers was published. How would you re-examine, rethink that book at the present moment?
Funny, I would rethink many of my books. That one, I wouldn't touch that one. That one was sort of, it was sort of magical, and it wasn't it wasn't deeply counterintuitive. Nothing in that book will be overturned, I think, because it didn't make claims that were based on, some particular strand of scientific reason. It was making a very, very, very obvious point, which is that we need to be humble in the face of our accomplishments, because we are not 100% responsible for our own successes. That's really what the book's about, right? It's just it is a little homily on the need for some degree of humility and on the part of the successful, and empathy for the unsuccessful. So almost any other book of mine, I would substantially rewrite. Tipping Point, oh my God. Blink, huge sections of it. I mean, half of Talking to Strangers is a refutation of Blink. So I have done this. And I have twice revisited and refuted the crime arguments in Tipping Point. So I'm not saying I don't think my work needs to be revisited and updated. It totally does, but that's not the book I would choose.
Interesting. Okay. Here's a question from Chelsea Legay. I grew up in the Moonies, a controversial religious sect. I'm using her language. Left 8 years ago and have since re-examined everything I know and then some. Stopping the re-examination is hard. How does one know when they've re-examined enough?
I don't think you should ever stop re-examining. I think that's part of your responsibility as a human being. I think you should, I always say, and this is more metaphorical, but you should try and change your mind about something every day. I think you have an obligation as a human being to go back over what you consider to be accepted wisdom and put it to the test, because the world doesn't stand still. And also, more importantly, you don't stand still. You know so much more at 40 than you did at 20. Why would you still believe what you believed when you were 20? Or at least, why would you leave what you believe at 20 untested, given the fact that you probably know 10 times more than you did back then? So I would say, I mean, if you were once in the Moonies, you have a more dramatic act of re-examination in front of you. But I would just say, you're doing what any human being should be doing.
Feels like a follow-on, knock-on of that question. What's the most common belief you think people should re-examine?
Probably prisons.
That's a big one.
Prisons are,
yeah.
If we were starting over, and if we didn't know anything about what the world looks like, we're just a bunch of smart people in a room from Mars. And we were like, okay, so people are going to break the rules. How should we punish them? No one would say, let's lock them up in a dark place for 20 years, destroy their families in so doing, and destroy their ability to ever become a better person. No one would say that. It's the craziest.
Right.
It is the dumbest.
Yeah.
I mean, it just drives me to distraction how stupid it is. Like, everyone should just rise up. I mean, what I find fascinating about the whole George Floyd movement about policing, long overdue, re-examination of the way in which police ought to behave in society. But by the way, prisons are 1,000 times worse than police. I mean, it's not even close. If you gave me, there are, in the main, most police officers do a good job, right? There are a lot of bad apples, but there is no prison in the United States that does a good job. The whole notion of a prison is absurd on its face. The institution is rotten to the core. It's just, I was just waiting for people to say, wait a minute, before we defund the police, maybe we should defund the prisons and actually, make them, and if you are at all concerned about, the social and economic and political equality for African Americans, dude, the prisons are where you start.
Right.
The police are important, but they are definitely in second place.
And even if someone was so craven as to not be interested in any of that, to me, the argument right now that you would make is this is a public health hazard. We are damning ourselves in terms of we're asking for epidemics to rage much more wildly than they ever would otherwise. Yeah.
I was going to say, I'll let you go. We'll ask another question. I can go on about prisons forever, so I thought.
No, but you're preaching to the choir here. Okay, let's see. Okay, this is a fun one from Manoj Kilnani. There's more information than ever before, so how does one know what to know and what not to know? Little Rumsfeldian puzzle there.
I would say pick your friends wisely. So much of your information about the world comes from your friends. And I would use friends are not just people. Friends are also institutions, media outlets, books. These are your friends. These are your intellectual friends. Choose them wisely. You try and pick things that represent a diverse range of viewpoints that are considered, that whoever created them took their time and had a seriousness of purpose. Just get rid of the frivolity. That's what I would do. You can't be harmed by being exposed to something that you ultimately disagree with, but you can be harmed by being exposed to something that is trivial and frivolous, because that's just, time is finite, right? Don't waste your time on that. But just, like I said, choose your friends wisely.
I think I want to squeeze in one last quick one, and you can't say prisons because you already did to another answer. This is from Elizabeth Rod. What keeps you up at night?
Well, I mean, boring answer, climate change. But not really. What does keep me up at night? I mean, really kind of...
I would go with climate change. That's like, anyway.
It doesn't really. I mean, it's too broad and looming. Like most people, the things that actually keep me up at night are like all the stuff I have to do the next day. Why, why would I just replace the tires on my car? Do I have a flat? Like that?
Right,
that kept me up last night. Like what? Good Lord, how do I have another flat?
Right. So it's like abolishing prisons and snow tires. Those are your two. Great. Yeah. Okay. Well, I think we have run out of time, but thank you for joining us on our discussion here today, Malcolm Gladwell. Please join this coming Thursday, September 24th at 1 p.m. Eastern Time for another live webinar when Big Think will be talking to 3 Michelin star winning chef Dominique Crenn of Atelier Crenn. As always, our live webinar will include a viewer Q&A with the comment section on our YouTube and Facebook platforms. Stay safe, stay healthy, and have a great day. Thanks again, Malcolm.
Thank you.